The coffin began to fly over the grave. Then something shocking fell from it. You can't avoid the intense grief and pain following the death of someone you love, but there are healthier ways to cope. Rather, one learns to live with grief, and over time, grief becomes less intense. At times, it will come to the forefront of life again when birthdays, anniversaries, or coming across an old photograph will jar a poignant memory. Many people who have not endured this particular type of loss can't understand it. They'll associate it with their loss, such as that of a parent or sibling. They'll want and expect the widow to get over it somehow. What may help in understanding this is that love never ends. The person they loved is gone, but the love remains. The only grief that's comparable in terms of lasting intensity, I believe, from reading accounts, is the loss of a child, and I can't even begin to know that grief as I've not experienced it, and God willing, never will. That, I believe, would be a different kind of living hell. Grief is the final responsibility of loving someone, and after the painful initial emotional fires of grief burnout, our grief for someone we loved and lost should become incorporated into our lives relatively comfortably. The more we love someone, the harder it will be to find that comfortable acceptance and the strength to carry that loss. There's no fixed timeline. So long as grief doesn't overtake and dominate your life, you need to get back to reasonable function and happiness in a reasonable amount of time. Many people have probably had nightmares about being buried alive or waking up in a confined space, and then your air runs out and there's nothing you can do. Just thinking about it is enough to give you goosebumps, isn't it? In the past, live burials were used as a method of execution, but sometimes it can actually happen by mistake when a person is in a catatonic state or coma. We have some stories about that today. Once he dreamed that his coffin was flying and his body was falling for many years. He can't understand this weird dream. However, what happened this day shocked everyone. A Darwin family were reportedly left distressed after the straps being used to lower their loved one's coffin into a grave snapped and their uncle's remains were exposed. Rosedale and Darwin MP Jake Berry broke about the incident, which happened on January 22 this year in Parliament yesterday, November 17, as part of a debate on regulation of funeral directors. Mr. Berry said that the incident occurred at Darwin Cemetery. Mr. Berry said the incident was caused by the snapping of the straps used to lower the coffin into the grave. After the straps snapped at the mouth of the grave, the coffin fell more than 8 feet into the open grave, resulting in exposure of the remains of the deceased. Understandably, many family members and other mourners immediately left the funeral. The family had been led to believe by Casey Funeral Services that enough members of the staff would be in attendance to assist at the graveside, but the family did not believe that was the case. They felt understandably very distressed about the situation. The family later complained to their MP about the funeral directors, Darwin-based Casey Funeral Services, as they believed that even if they had not snapped, the straps used to lower the coffin into the grave were not long enough. However, a spokesperson for the company responsible said the details provided by Jake Berry were inaccurate and that they were disappointed he had divulged the information in a public debate. They declined to provide a further statement. In fact, if they had to lower the coffin into the grave themselves because of the lack of assistance from the funeral directors, they would have ended up lying on their stomachs at the graveside, lowering the coffin to the floor. Mr. Berry added, "It was a 3-person grave, so it was very deep, and my deceased constituent was the first person to be interred. This was an appalling incident, and I pay tribute to Father Brian, who is a well-respected and widely liked parish priest based at St. Joseph's and St. Edward's in Darwin. He assisted the family, arranged for the majority of them to go home, sent away the mourners who had come to pay their last respects, and organized the removal of the deceased body from the grave, which had to be undertaken by cemetery workers and the remaining family members. The body was then returned to the funeral directors and another coffin was sought. The body was cleaned, having been at the bottom of the grave, and a team of pallbearers completed the burial the following day, which was Saturday, 23 January. The incident was exceptionally traumatic for the family, who are already grieving the loss of a well-loved family member. Following the incident, they went back to see Emma Childery at Casey Funeral Services on 28 January in order to ask her some questions about the normal operating practices of her business. They were made aware at the meeting at the Casey Funeral Services was not a member of the National Association of Funeral Directors, or the National Society of Allied and Independent Funeral Directors. She confirmed to the family it was the first time they had heard it, and I must admit that it was the first time I had heard it that both registration schemes are voluntary. Some funeral directors, including the one I have mentioned, do not join such schemes, largely because of the cost burden of doing so. In light of the incident, Mr. Berry said he wants to address the gap in the regulations that enables some providers to operate with limited or no regulation. The regulations do not enable families who have suffered in this way or who have any other grievance to pursue the funeral directors through a professional body, he added. A spokesperson for KC Funeral Services said the information contained within this debate are wholly sick, inaccurate, and I'm very disappointed to learn that Jake Berry would go ahead and divulge this information without speaking with me first, if not to at least learn my side of the story. I am seeking further advice regarding this. I'm not prepared to make any further comments until I have sought further legal advice. This young woman was declared dead by authority. Her mother dreamed that her daughter was flying before her funeral. She took her ring and felt that there was nothing normal. It can be a dream that generates a lot of impressions when waking up. Thinking about death has never been pleasant. Human beings know many things. They obtain academic degrees, etc., but they've never known how to understand something as natural as death. All living beings inevitably go through the phase of birth and death, so it's time to start breaking this pattern of fear in the face of something so natural. Attachments to people are what make us suffer. When you have to say goodbye to move on to another cycle. Dreaming about a coffin is related to death, but it turns out that beyond this evocation, there are other meanings that are not necessarily negative or sad that you should know. Coffins allude at the end of stages, so it is very important to know how to interpret them according to the context, size, and color in which they appear. A woman's funeral in Peru was interrupted when the woman herself started banging on the lid of the coffin to say she was alive. In a shocking twist to a tragic day, stunned relatives carrying the coffin of Rosa Isabel Suspensalaca, 36, opened it and found their relative with their eyes open looking at them. Rosa and the coffin were rushed to a nearby referential hospital on the back of a pickup truck, where she was quickly hooked up to a life support machine. Sheepa's medics confirmed that she did have vital signs, albeit very low ones, and her condition improved slightly once on life support, giving hope that a miracle was in progress. But Rosa's condition then rapidly deteriorated, and she passed away a few hours later. Cemetery caretaker Juan Segundo Cajo said she opened her eyes and was sweating. I immediately went to my office and called the police. A video taken shortly after the astounding discovery shows a team of police carrying the coffin through a crowd to a pickup truck. The video then cut to a team of medics standing over the coffin with an unconscious Rosa at their feet. Rosa had been in a serious car crash, which claimed the life of her brother-in-law and seriously injured her nephews. She, too, had been pronounced dead after the crash, and her relatives had arranged a funeral for her on April 26 in the city of Lamque. Her relatives expressed predictable outrage that Rosa had been declared dead and sent to the morgue for a funeral in the first place. An unnamed aunt, furious with the hospital, said, "We want to know why my niece reacted yesterday when we were taking her to be buried. We have the videos in which she pushes and touches the coffin." It has been speculated that the medics at the hospital where she had been taken initially after the crash had mistaken a coma for being dead. Police are now investigating whether staff at the hospital negligently took Rosa off life support, pronounced her dead, and sent her to the morgue without proper review to check that she was actually dead. Rosa's 3 nephews who were injured in the same crash as she are said to be recovering in a hospital but still in serious condition. It was painful to lose for this family, and how are they dealing with it?